Picture yourself waking up one day to find the driveway to your land completely obstructed by a gate you've never seen before, secured with a heavy lock. There was no advance warning or communication, only a stark metal barrier bearing a sign that read, "Property of Oakage HOA." This was my reality 3 months ago. What they failed to realize, however, was that I had been preparing for this exact moment for 5 years. That gate was merely a trap, and one by one, they walked directly into it. I want to share the account of how a formidable HOA family attempted to unlawfully take my land, only to end up losing not just their standing in the community, but also facing a slew of legal actions. I have always been an exceptionally thorough planner, a trait that contributed to my success as a software engineer. My strengths lie in an acute attention to detail, the ability to foresee potential issues, and the creation of contingency plans for when problems inevitably occur. My former colleagues often jested that I could devise code to address challenges that hadn't even materialized yet. These very skills would become indispensable as I found myself in a standoff with one of the most ruthless homeowners associations in San Diego County. My name is Alex Morgan. At the age of 38, following many years of residing in small apartments and diligently saving every dollar, I had finally accumulated enough funds to acquire my ideal property, 5 acres of untouched land on the periphery of San Diego. This land shared a border with the distinguished Oakage community, a detail that would later prove to be the origin of all my difficulties. My vision was straightforward yet grand: to construct an energy-saving home complete with a workshop where I could pursue my personal projects, far from the chaotic pace of urban living. The land possessed all the qualities I desired: ample space, seclusion, and, most critically, a stunning ocean vista that transformed every sunset into what felt like a private spectacle from nature. What I was unaware of at the time of purchase was that this very ocean view had captured another person's interest long before I entered the picture. Victoria Reynolds, the 57-year-old widow who governed the Oakage Homeowners Association with absolute authority, had coveted my parcel of land for years. Hailing from Boston with inherited wealth and deeply ingrained biases, Victoria regarded the exclusivity of Oakage as its most precious feature. The idea of someone like me, a single, middle-class engineer, constructing a home of my own design on an adjacent lot was apparently an affront to her refined sensibilities. Property values are the very essence of a community such as ours, she had once declared at a community gathering, a recording of which I later viewed. We are obligated to safeguard them at any price. Her true meaning was that she would stop at nothing, including breaking the law, to protect them. Victoria was not acting in isolation. Her devoted second-in-command was Harold Mitchell, a 62-year-old retired corporate lawyer who deferred to her with the meekness of a man whose career was built on serving more forceful personalities. While not inherently malevolent, Harold's pliancy made him a liability, a man who would knowingly do wrong if instructed by the right individual. Completing their inner sanctum was Jennifer Lee, the HOA secretary and a driven 45-year-old real estate agent. In contrast to Harold, Jennifer would ultimately experience a moral reckoning upon grasping the full extent of Victoria's intentions. I first detected an issue upon receiving an unsolicited invitation to a meeting of the Oakage HOA to address boundary matters. I respectfully declined, pointing out that since I was not an Oakage resident, their association held no authority over my land. It was then that their amicable facade dropped. A campaign of escalating pressure followed, aimed at coercing me to sell my property for a small part of its actual worth. But Victoria had made a grave miscalculation. She was oblivious to the kind of person she was confronting. She perceived me as just another hurdle to be cleared, not comprehending that my background in designing security systems had equipped me with a profound understanding of defensive measures and trap setting, knowledge that would ultimately lead to her downfall. One evening, while sifting through old property deeds for historical information about my land, I unearthed a compelling fact. Victoria's methods seemed familiar. She had employed comparable strategies years ago to oust another landowner. Her preference was for gradual pressure and public shaming over direct conflict. The sequence was undeniable: issue citations for fabricated problems, obstruct permit applications, manufacture difficulties with municipal authorities, and finally, once the individual was sufficiently exhausted, Present a lowball offer that felt like a welcome reprieve from the relentless harassment. I will not engage in her game, I resolved, meticulously arranging the historical papers I had collected. But I will allow her to believe that I will. Buried within that collection of antiquated land title records, I discovered a minute detail that Victoria and her associates had missed, a detail that would not only preserve my property, but could also threaten the entire structure of their HOA dynasty. The campaign of harassment started as expected. I would receive official-looking notifications every few days regarding non-existent infractions, excessive weed proliferation on land I had yet to clear, construction refused when no building had commenced, and unpermitted structures that were purely products of Victoria's imagination. Each notice was accompanied by a threat of fines and potential liens on my property. These were all completely unfounded, naturally, but designed to be daunting to an uninformed person. Marco Sanchez, a local building inspector in his 50s, began to make frequent appearances for routine inspections. His animosity was thinly veiled, and it did not take much to verify my suspicion that he was under Victoria's influence. Each time I filed for permits, inexplicable issues would surface, halting the process for an indefinite period. I maintained scrupulous records of every communication, every postponement, and every groundless citation, all while projecting an image of growing frustration and defeat. Victoria was executing her strategy, and I was permitting her to believe she was prevailing. "Mr. Morgan," Marco stated during one especially strained visit, making no effort to mask his scorn, "I regret to inform you that there are multiple compliance problems with your preliminary designs. Nothing that can't be rectified, of course, but it will necessitate significant revisions and a complete resubmission." He offered a cold smile. "These processes require time, a great deal of time." I nodded, embodying the role of the demoralized property owner. "I see. I will begin working on those changes immediately." The moment he departed, I contacted Olivia Bennett, an old friend from college who had since become a prominent real estate lawyer. "Olivia, I believe it is time to intensify our investigation," I said, my voice steady despite my mounting resolve. "I need to learn everything about Victoria Reynolds, her cohorts, and particularly any previous legal troubles involving the Oakage HOA." The situation reached a critical point at a community assembly where Victoria openly accused me of intending to construct an unsightly structure that would lower property values throughout Oakage. She went as far as to display digitally altered images of a hideous, industrial-style building, supposedly derived from my blueprints. Blueprints I had never revealed to anyone, much less the HOA. The ultimate flourish was her theatrical closing statement. "Mr. Morgan clearly lacks any respect for the aesthetic principles that define Oakage's distinction. We cannot permit a single inconsiderate person to tear down what generations have established." A wave of troubled whispers spread through the room as Victoria stood at the lectern with a self-satisfied expression. She was unaware that my sister, Rachel, a journalist, was seated discreetly at the back of the room, recording the entire event. As we departed the meeting, Rachel gave my arm a supportive squeeze. "She's digging her own grave, Alex." Every word of that was slander. Later that night, after hours of further investigation, I uncovered Victoria's genuine motive. The proposed expansion of the community pool, a project she had championed to guarantee her re-election as HOA president, demanded more land than the association possessed. My property was not merely opportune, it was essential for her political endurance within the community. Yet, as I investigated more deeply, I unearthed something even more unsettling. Victoria's desire for my land was not just for the HOA's advantage. She had a personal investment that dated back 15 years, a secret she had diligently protected, and which I now held the unwitting key to unlocking. Locating George Coleman proved to be a challenge. The 70-year-old former city councilman had intentionally maintained a private life since his retirement, but he was the precise individual I needed to speak with. As one of the original planners who participated in the area's development, he possessed more knowledge about the history of Oakage and its environs than anyone else. Crucially, he held no fondness for Victoria Reynolds. "She has been engaging in these sorts of schemes for years," George informed me as we sat on his veranda overlooking the city. His weathered hand shook slightly as he gestured to different locations on the old maps laid out on the table between us. "But this time, she has miscalculated. Do you see this road here? It's an old public access path that was never formally decommissioned. The more recent maps omit it because it has fallen out of use, but from a legal standpoint, it remains a public right-of-way. I examined the faint line that traversed a corner of my land. So, you're telling me there's an alternative route to my property that doesn't pass through Oakage land? George affirmed with a sly grin. Precisely. And if an individual were to, say, rehabilitate that access route, there isn't a single thing Victoria or her HOA could do to stop it. This was the crucial information I required, a method to outwit Victoria in her own game. However, I desired more than just entry to my property. I sought justice for the ordeal she had subjected me to. Leveraging my expertise in designing security systems, I started to devise a strategy that would turn Victoria's own methods against her. First, I would install a decoy gate at what seemed to be the sole entrance to my land, the one adjacent to Oakage. This would be Victoria's focus, her opportunity to bar my access, just as she had done with others previously. But while her attention was on that main entrance, I would discreetly clear and rehabilitate the neglected public access road, establishing a secondary entrance known only to me. The decoy gate would be outfitted with concealed cameras and sensors to record every unlawful action the HOA took. It was, effectively, a sophisticated trap for an overreaching homeowners association. "This is a gamble, Alex," Olivia cautioned when I outlined my plan to her. "What if their actions escalate beyond just denying you access? What if they cause damage to your property or physically attempt to stop you from building?" "That is precisely what I am relying on," I answered, presenting her with the security system I had engineered. "Every move they make will be recorded from several perspectives. By the conclusion of this, we will possess sufficient evidence to dismantle their operation for good." Meanwhile, my sister Rachel had initiated her own inquiry into Victoria's past activities. Her findings corroborated my suspicions. Victoria was not merely an overly enthusiastic HOA president. She was a shrewd manipulator with a track record of exploiting her position for personal enrichment. The pool expansion project she promoted concealed a private deal with a development firm for which her late husband had worked, a blatant conflict of interest she had failed to disclose to the other HOA members. Over the subsequent weeks, I set my plan in motion. By day, I made conspicuous efforts to reach my property via the main entrance, consistently feigning frustration when intercepted by HOA officials. By night, aided by reliable contractors who appreciated the need for confidentiality, I cleared the overgrown public access road and installed my security network. Cameras were expertly concealed in trees, rocks, and even within the decorative features of the decoy gate itself. Every foot of my property boundary was under surveillance. Every conversation within earshot would be recorded. "Everything is prepared," I informed Olivia after the last camera was in place. "Now, we just have to wait for Victoria to act." I did not have to wait for long. 3 days later, upon approaching the main entrance to my land, I discovered exactly what I had anticipated: a formidable metal gate obstructing the path, decorated with a newly painted sign that declared it the property of the Oakage HOA. The trap was laid, and Victoria had walked right into it. What she was unaware of was that while she believed she was excluding me, she was in fact ensnaring herself in a legal quagmire of her own creation. I stood before the recently erected gate, ensuring my response was documented by both my concealed cameras and the dashcam in my vehicle. "What in the world is this?" I yelled, yanking on the substantial lock for dramatic effect. I contacted the police, fully aware they would likely do nothing more than take a statement. But creating an official record was a key part of my plan. Officer Williams showed up approximately 20 minutes later, appearing disinterested and somewhat irritated. "Property disagreement," he mumbled while taking notes. "This is a civil issue, Mr. Morgan. You'll have to address it with the HOA or consult a lawyer." "But they've unlawfully blocked the entrance to my land," I argued, performing my role flawlessly. "How is that not considered trespassing or vandalism?" "Look, I see you're angry, but without definitive proof of who put up the gate and whether they were authorized to do so, there's little we can do. I'll make a report, but you should speak with an attorney." He gave me a case number and departed, just as I had foreseen. What I hadn't anticipated was how soon Victoria would appear to revel in her perceived victory. Less than an hour after the police left, a black Mercedes drew up next to my car. Victoria emerged, with Harold trailing behind, both attired as if for a luncheon at the country club rather than for committing property offenses. "Mr. Morgan," Victoria called out, her voice laced with feigned solicitude. Is there an issue? I turned to them, fighting to hide my contentment at how perfectly they were falling for my ruse. Yes, there is an issue. Someone has illegally obstructed the path to my property. Would you happen to have any information about that? Victoria's smile was icy and rehearsed. This gate is situated on Oakage HOA land. I'm sorry to say your property is now considered part of our community due to a recent boundary revision. We've been attempting to contact you about signing our covenant agreements. Boundary revision? That's preposterous. You can't simply seize someone else's land. Harold came forward, looking visibly distressed but resolved to play his part. In fact, according to our land surveys and some recently unearthed historical records, this access road has always belonged to Oakage. We are merely fortifying our community's boundary. So, you're telling me I am unable to access my own property unless I become a member of your HOA? I inquired, ensuring my voice was recorded with perfect clarity. That is one interpretation, Victoria answered coolly. Although, I would prefer to frame it as an invitation to join our distinguished community. Naturally, if you find our regulations overly burdensome, we would be willing to buy your land at a reasonable market price. Reasonable market price? I scoffed. Let me venture a guess. You decide what is reasonable. Victoria presented me with an envelope. Our proposal is inside. It is quite fair, considering the situation. I recommend you examine it closely. Without access to your land, its worth is significantly reduced. I accepted the envelope, already certain it held an offer for about half the property's true value. And if I decline, then I'm afraid you will be left with a beautiful plot of land that you can never utilize or improve, Victoria stated, her smile unwavering. The decision is yours. Mr. Morgan. After they departed, their expressions showing the smug fulfillment of people who believed they had prevailed, I opened the envelope and verified my assumption. The offer was insultingly low, just as I had anticipated. I called Olivia right away. They fell for it, I told her. Every word was captured in high definition. Victoria explicitly confessed to obstructing access to compel me to either join the HOA or sell for a lower price. That's a classic case of coercion, Olivia responded, her excitement palpable. How soon do you want to close the trap? Not just yet, I said, observing Victoria's car vanish around the bend. I have arranged to meet with her tomorrow to go over my options. Let's see how much more leeway she'll give herself to get into trouble. What Victoria and Harold were unaware of was that during our conversation, a professional surveying team was discreetly confirming the boundaries of my property and documenting the presence of the forgotten public access road. They had just found something even more important than we had hoped for, something that would completely reverse the situation on Victoria in ways none of us could have foreseen. The meeting with Victoria was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Oakage Clubhouse, a venue purposefully selected to overwhelm me with its lavishness. I showed up 15 minutes ahead of schedule, attired in what I trusted appeared to be the attire of a man on the brink of capitulation. Victoria, predictably, made me wait, a power move as obvious as it was trite. When she finally entered the room at 2:20, accompanied by Harold and a man I did not know, she made no effort to apologize for being late. Mr. Morgan, I appreciate your willingness to be sensible, she started, indicating for me to sit opposite her at the enormous oak table. This is Brian Cooper, our Director of Security. He will be responsible for carrying out whatever measures we agree upon today. Brian, a powerfully built man in his late 40s with the vigilant gaze of someone who took his duties extremely seriously, gave me a curt nod. I made a mental note of his presence, aware that he would likely be included in subsequent legal actions. I've considered your proposal, I stated, deliberately making my voice sound uncertain. It seems, well, it's significantly less than what I invested in the property. Victoria's smile was devoid of warmth. The property market is volatile, Mr. Morgan, and land without access naturally fetches a lower price. I can guarantee you that, given the circumstances, our offer is exceedingly generous. For the following hour, I portrayed a man being slowly worn down, periodically raising points that Victoria effortlessly dismissed. Harold was mostly quiet, although I saw him fidget uncomfortably whenever Victoria's remarks veered into legally dubious areas. Brian remained by the door, arms folded, a quiet yet intimidating figure. I require some time to contemplate this, I finally said, rubbing my temples for added drama. It's a great deal to take in. Of course, Victoria responded, evidently convinced she had me cornered. Take the weekend. But I must advise you, Mr. Morgan, this offer is only valid until Monday. Beyond that, well, your choices will become considerably more restricted. As I departed the clubhouse, I made a point of appearing defeated for any onlookers. What Victoria didn't realize was that I had spent the entire meeting collecting proof. The recording device concealed in my watch had captured every menacing insinuation, every subtle threat. More importantly, she had no inkling that I was proceeding directly to my land via the rehabilitated public access road, a route her security personnel were completely unaware of. The road was uneven but drivable, meandering through a forested area before coming out near the rear of my property. Clearing it of years of dense undergrowth had been a significant effort, but the outcome was well worth every blister and scratch. As I drove into the clearing where I had stashed my building materials, I couldn't resist grinning at the thought of Victoria's expression when she found out I had been accessing my land the entire time. Over the subsequent week, I expedited my preparations using the concealed entrance. I transported materials and machinery for the foundation of my home. A small, trusted team of workers, all committed to secrecy and generously paid for their discretion, commenced the initial phase of the work. In the meantime, Victoria ramped up her pressure tactics, oblivious that her every action was being recorded. The HOA engaged a private security firm to monitor what they believed was the sole access point to my land. These security guards were tasked with blocking my entry, a clear instance of false imprisonment if I were to try using that path. Victoria even went as far as submitting fraudulent documents to the county, asserting partial ownership of my land based on historical claims. Jennifer Lee, who had been quietly watching these increasingly desperate tactics, started to document Victoria's behavior, sensing that the situation was escalating dangerously. The situation took a dramatic turn when Victoria, angered by my seeming absence, ordered the security team to enter my property to check for compliance issues. In truth, this was nothing less than state-sanctioned trespassing. The cameras recorded everything as Brian Cooper and two of his associates broke the lock on the gate they had put up themselves and went onto my land. They spent almost 2 hours taking pictures and placing official-looking stakes at different locations, all illegal acts that would later be central to my lawsuit against them. What they didn't anticipate finding was proof that someone had been working on the property. Upon finding the partially built foundation, Brian immediately contacted Victoria. The cameras clearly recorded his side of the conversation. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have a problem. Someone has been constructing on the Morgan property. I'm not sure how they're getting access, but there's new construction work here." Victoria's reply was not captured, but its impact on Brian was unmistakable. His expression grew stern, and after ending the call, he told his men to vandalize some of the equipment I had left behind. Another criminal act carefully recorded by my surveillance setup. That evening, Detective David Torres contacted me. He was a no-nonsense police officer in his 40s known for his integrity and had been tasked with looking into my increasingly specific complaints about the HOA's conduct. "Mr. Morgan, I've gone over the proof you've provided. This is more than just a civil matter. The property damage itself is vandalism, but the falsified records and organized harassment could be considered criminal conspiracy. I would like to arrange a meeting with you to go over this in more detail." In the meantime, Jennifer Lee had reached her limit. After finding Victoria's falsified paperwork, she contacted me using an anonymous email address. "I can no longer be involved in this. I have copies of all the documents. When you are prepared to proceed, inform me." The elements were all coming together. Victoria believed she was closing in on my property, but in reality, she was trapping herself in a tangle of legal trouble. And she remained completely unaware of my hidden access road, or the fact that I had been building on my land right under her watch. The moment had arrived to activate the trap. The expression on Victoria Reynolds' face when she saw me standing on my land with a complete construction team was worth every dollar I had put into my detailed scheme. Her black Mercedes came to a screeching stop at the HOA's gate, and she almost fell out of the driver's seat, her impeccably styled hair coming loose as she marched towards the fence. "What is the meaning of this?" she yelled, her voice hitting a higher note than I had ever heard. "How did you access this area?" "Brian," she screamed into her phone, "get security over here immediately." I walked towards the fence with a calm demeanor, careful to remain on my side of the property boundary. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. A lovely day to begin constructing a house, isn't it?" Harold's car pulled up behind Victoria's, and he got out looking pale. Unlike Victoria, He grasped the gravity of the situation at once. "Victoria," he whispered, pulling at her arm, "we ought to talk about this in private." "There is nothing to talk about," she retorted, snatching her arm back. "He is trespassing on his own property. That is not possible." I couldn't resist a small smile. "Not impossible at all when you understand the history of this place. You see, while you were occupied with installing your unlawful gate at what you believed was the sole entry to my property, I was busy restoring the original public access road on the eastern edge. You know, the one clearly indicated on the county's initial surveys from 1952. I held up a laminated copy of the survey, observing as Harold's face changed from worried to genuinely frightened. Victoria seized the document from my grasp, her eyes quickly scanning the clearly delineated public rights-of-way that crossed a portion of my land. "This is a fake," she hissed, although the unsteadiness in her voice revealed her doubt. "The county clerk's office would say otherwise," I responded calmly, "as would the state transportation department, which still has it on record as an unmaintained public road, never formally closed, just overlooked until now." Brian Cooper showed up with 2 security guards, all appearing baffled by the situation playing out before them. Victoria shoved the survey into Brian's hands. "Get these people out of here immediately. They are on HOA land." Brian looked at the document, then shifted his gaze uncertainly between Victoria and me. "Mrs. Reynolds, if this is correct, we lack the jurisdiction to do what you're asking." Victoria's self-control was now completely gone, her face red with fury. I spoke up slightly to make sure the concealed cameras recorded everything distinctly. "I should let you know that we are all being recorded at this moment. Any effort to obstruct my construction team would be considered criminal trespassing and potentially assault. I have already discussed the earlier vandalism of my equipment with Detective Torres. I doubt you want to accumulate more charges." Harold finally summoned his courage. "Victoria, stop this right now." He faced me, fully in lawyer mode, despite the beads of sweat on his brow. "Mr. Morgan, I am confident we can sort out this misunderstanding without further conflict. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with our respective lawyers to—" "No more meetings," I interrupted him sharply. "No more talks. Your HOA unlawfully blocked entry to my property, submitted fake documents asserting ownership of my land, damaged my equipment, and tried to force me into selling at a fraction of its market value. I am constructing my house as intended on my land, using a legal access road that your HOA president conveniently missed in her eagerness to enlarge her personal domain." Victoria, realizing her grip on the situation was loosening, made a critical mistake. "Brian," she ordered, her voice chillingly furious, "stop that construction immediately. I don't care how you do it." Brian paused, looking more and more uneasy. "Mrs. Reynolds, I legally cannot. I'm not employing you to inform me of what you cannot do." Her words erupted, loud enough for everyone present and every hidden microphone to capture clearly. "Either resolve the situation or seek employment elsewhere." That was all I required. Victoria had just unequivocally instructed her security personnel to commit an illegal act on camera and in the presence of several witnesses. Brian, demonstrating more prudence than his employer, shook his head and retreated. "I apologize, Mrs. Reynolds. My firm offers security, not illegal services. Our business here is concluded." He gestured to his men, and they returned to their vehicle, leaving Victoria vulnerable and without support. Harold physically positioned himself between Victoria and the fence, with his back to me. "We are departing now, before you make any further statements that will be recorded in a deposition." He nearly had to pull her back to her car, speaking urgently into her ear as she resisted his hold. As they departed, I saw Harold glance back at me through the passenger window. His expression was not of anger, but of a growing understanding. He had finally grasped that they were not dealing with an easy target. They had stumbled into a meticulously prepared trap, and now they were ensnared with no hope of escape. The following morning, Victoria and Harold were presented with legal documents at their residences. The lawsuit identified the Oak Ridge HOA, Victoria Reynolds, Harold Mitchell, and Brian Cooper security firm as defendants, with allegations spanning from trespassing and vandalism to fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. Appended to the lawsuit were numerous pages of proof, photographs, video evidence, counterfeit documents, and signed affidavits from witnesses, including Jennifer Lee, whose testimony from within the organization would prove to be damning. That afternoon, the local news crew arrived outside the Oakage gates. The report they were about to air would create a stir throughout the community. Prominent HOA accused of criminal plot to seize adjacent land. Victoria's meticulously maintained public persona and the standing of Oakage itself were on the verge of collapsing in full view of the entire city. When Jennifer Lee contacted me 2 days after the lawsuit was initiated, she sounded like a changed woman. The self-assured, driven real estate agent had been supplanted by someone who was anxious yet resolved to act correctly. "Alex, I discovered something in the HOA's private records," she said in a hushed tone, as if fearing she might be overheard despite being on her personal phone. "Victoria is not just pursuing your land for the HOA's benefit. This involves something far more significant, and I believe I understand why she harbors such animosity towards you." We arranged to meet at a downtown coffee shop, well away from Oakage and its watchful community. Jennifer showed up in sunglasses and a hat, glancing nervously over her shoulder as she sat down in the booth opposite me. "I'm putting everything on the line by meeting with you," she stated in a low voice. "Victoria has influential connections. I will safeguard your identity as much as I can," I promised her. "But I need to know what you discovered." Jennifer retrieved a folder from her bag and pushed it across the table. "These are duplicates of confidential correspondence between Victoria and Clearwater Development, the firm her late husband was employed by before his passing. They have been orchestrating a plan for a high-end resort on the hillside with ocean views. Your land is the crucial element. It is the only parcel that offers direct access to both the main highway and the coastal scenery. Without it, the entire venture collapses." I perused the documents, taken aback by the magnitude of what I was witnessing. Architectural drawings, financial forecasts, marketing plans, all revolving around a development that would swallow my land. Why didn't they just present me with a formal offer before I made the purchase? "This appears to be a project worth millions." "That's where the personal element comes in," Jennifer answered, indicating a date on one of the papers. "Your property was originally owned by Victoria's husband's family. They were forced to sell it during a period of financial hardship 15 years ago. Edward Reynolds, Victoria's husband, had always planned to repurchase it once their financial situation improved, but he passed away before he had the chance. At his deathbed, Victoria vowed to him that she would get it back and create something to commemorate him. So when I acquired it, I unintentionally became part of a deeply personal vendetta. Victoria perceives you as the barrier to honoring her final pledge to her husband. And with the Clearwater agreement, she is positioned to gain millions personally, entirely apart from any advantage to the HOA. The community pool expansion was merely a pretext to rally the HOA board to her cause." I leaned back, trying to absorb this new information. That clarifies the vehemence of her campaign against me. This isn't merely about property values or HOA authority. It's personal for her. "Personal and profitable," Jennifer amended. "Do not confuse Victoria's emotional attachment with honorable intentions. She is slated to get a $2 million consulting fee if this transaction proceeds, in addition to a continuous share of the resort's earnings." As we were further discussing the consequences of these findings, my phone vibrated with a message from Olivia. "Reynolds just submitted a request for an emergency injunction. Alleges your access road is hazardous. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Be prepared." Victoria was launching her counterattack, leveraging her legal contacts to attempt to halt my construction while the lawsuit was pending. It was precisely what I had anticipated. She could not permit me to build while the legal proceedings continued. If my home were finished before the case was settled, her development ambitions would be effectively nullified. What neither of us foresaw was the unexpected element that entered the situation the next morning. As I walked into the courthouse with Olivia, a tall, well-dressed man in his mid-30s came up to us. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Thomas Reynolds, Victoria's son. We must have a conversation." Thomas had traveled from Boston upon hearing about the lawsuit from a business contact who had seen the news report. In contrast to his mother, he seemed honest and distressed by what he had learned. "I was completely unaware of what she was up to," he clarified as we found a secluded spot in the courthouse lobby. "My father always mentioned that land with a sense of loss. But this unlawful conduct is not what he would have supported. What is your mother's take on it?" Olivia inquired carefully. "She won't talk about it with me," Thomas answered, rubbing his forehead in exhaustion. "She insists she's safeguarding my father's legacy, but I've reviewed the Clearwater papers. This has nothing to do with legacy. It's about wealth and power. It has always been that way with her." Before we could proceed with our discussion, the bailiff announced our case. Inside the courtroom, Victoria's formidable lawyer contended that my use of the derelict, unkept road created safety and environmental risks, and he requested an immediate cessation of all building activities while these issues were thoroughly examined. A procedure that would conveniently span months, if not years. When our turn came, Olivia calmly showed proof that I had already secured all the required permits for both the road's rehabilitation and my construction project. She also disclosed that the county had examined the access road just a few days prior and had confirmed it met all safety standards. The judge, an older woman known for her direct and efficient decision-making, did not deliberate for long. "The application for an emergency injunction is rejected," she stated, casting a severe glance at Victoria's lawyer. Furthermore, the court is troubled by the consistent pattern of obstruction detailed in Mr. Morgan's sworn statement. The defendants are consequently directed to cease any additional actions that could obstruct access to or construction on the plaintiff's land while this case moves towards trial. As we departed the courtroom, Thomas approached Victoria in the corridor. Although I was unable to hear their exchange, their body language was revealing. Thomas was confronting, Victoria was defensive, and then they both moved to a more secluded area for what seemed to be a very tense argument. "Now that's a development I did not anticipate," Olivia remarked as we observed them vanish around a corner. Having her own son oppose her might be the one thing Victoria was not ready for. Later that day, Jennifer called with the newest information. Victoria had a total breakdown at the emergency HOA board meeting. Thomas appeared and openly challenged her about the Clearwater agreement. She admitted to everything: the fake documents, the orders for vandalism, the unlawful gate, insisting it was all necessary to protect Edward's legacy. The board is in disarray. Half of them are considering resigning to escape legal responsibility. The trap had now fully closed, ensnaring not only Victoria but also revealing the deep-seated corruption that had been festering within the Oak Ridge HOA for many years. With the injunction denied, my construction could continue without interruption. With Jennifer's documents and Thomas's help, the lawsuit was almost guaranteed to be successful. And with Victoria's public admission, criminal charges were now a distinct possibility. I possessed everything required not just to win this conflict decisively, but also to potentially see Victoria face significant legal repercussions for her behavior. The question that remained was whether victory by itself would suffice, or if there might be a more fulfilling and perhaps more just conclusion to this dispute. "Mr. Morgan, thank you for consenting to this meeting," he said, indicating the chair opposite him. "I am aware that you are fully entitled to proceed with both the lawsuit and the criminal allegations. What my mother did was indefensible." I took a seat, scrutinizing Thomas's features for any hint of Victoria's manipulative nature, but all I saw was sincere regret and what appeared to be a surprising amount of shame. "I am interested to know why you requested this meeting, Thomas. Your mother has made her stance very clear." "That is exactly the reason I am here," Thomas answered, placing a leather portfolio on the table. "My father was not the person my mother makes him out to be. Yes, he was sorry to have lost that property, but not due to any emotional connection. He was a shrewd businessman who recognized its potential worth." He slid a few old papers over to me. "These are his private journals and letters from that time. He never instructed my mother to get anything back. That is a story she fabricated to rationalize her fixation." I meticulously inspected the documents, recognizing Edward Reynolds' handwriting detailing business failures and a philosophical attitude towards losses. With no reference to a final promise or any persistent emotional tie to the property I now possessed. "So, the vow she asserts she is keeping is a fabrication," Thomas stated, his voice laced with sorrow. "My father would be appalled by what she has done in his name. He was a formidable businessman, but he was a man of integrity. He valued fair play and adherence to the law." Victoria showed up exactly on schedule, her typically commanding presence somewhat lessened by recent developments. She paused for a moment upon seeing her son, then collected herself and occupied the last available seat. Harold Mitchell came in behind her, appearing as though he hadn't rested in days, and Jennifer Lee entered discreetly after them, choosing a chair slightly away from the main group. Olivia, who had been looking over papers in the corner, came to sit next to me as Victoria began to speak. "I consented to this meeting because Thomas thinks there might be a way to resolve this without additional trouble. Although I stand by the principle of my actions, even if they were carried out with excessive zeal." I couldn't help but grin at her stubborn refusal to admit any fault. "Mrs. Reynolds, let's be absolutely clear on the current situation. I possess recorded proof of trespassing, vandalism, the submission of fraudulent documents, and a conspiracy to unlawfully take my property. The district attorney is considering whether to file criminal charges, and my civil action names not only you personally, but the entire HOA board. Your insurance will not cover deliberate misconduct, which means you could be facing personal financial collapse. Is that a correct assessment? Harold winced noticeably, while Victoria's expression remained impassive, though a muscle near her eye twitched. What is it you truly desire, Mr. Morgan? To ruin Oakage? To see me imprisoned? Would that quench your thirst for vengeance? I do not seek revenge, Mrs. Reynolds. I never have. I simply wanted what I've always wanted, to construct my home and live peacefully. Everything that has transpired since has been a direct consequence of your choices, not mine. Thomas leaned in, his eyes moving between his mother and me. I have dedicated the past week to examining everything, the authentic documents and the forged ones, the security footage, the witness testimonies. There is no doubt that what occurred was unlawful and wrong. He then addressed Victoria. Mother, you must face the facts. This situation will not simply disappear. Victoria's self-control finally broke, her voice escalating sharply. That property was meant to be our heritage. Your father never requested that you do any of this. Thomas cut in decisively. I have read his journals. This entire campaign is solely your creation. The ensuing silence was filled with the weight of many years of misguided loyalty and strategic ambition. Victoria looked at her son, her expression changing from fury to what might have been sorrow in someone capable of true introspection. I have met with the executives from Clearwater Development, Thomas went on, now speaking to me. They are prepared to present you with a formal offer for the property. Fair market value, plus a significant bonus. Everything will be transparent and officially recorded. No coercive methods, no intimidation, just a straightforward business transaction. I took a moment to think about this. And if I have no desire to sell, then they will honor that choice and seek development opportunities elsewhere. Thomas answered immediately. But I felt you should at least have the chance to consider a formal offer before you make your final choice. It was a compelling proposal. The reality was, although I had been completely set on building my ideal home on that land, the events of the last few months had soured the whole endeavor. Every glance at the view would bring this dispute to mind. Every sunset would be colored by the memory of Victoria's manipulative tactics. I am open to hearing the proposal, I eventually stated. But there are other issues that must be settled, regardless of whether I choose to sell. Olivia nodded and took charge of the discussion, presenting our conditions. A formal apology from Victoria and the HOA board, complete repayment of all my costs, including attorney's fees, the immediate dismantling of the unlawful gate, and Victoria's departure from the HOA board. In return, I would withdraw the civil action and consent to not press for criminal charges. Harold promptly saw this as the lifeline it represented. On behalf of the board, I find these conditions to be fair and agreeable. Victoria began to protest, but Thomas put a restraining hand on her arm. Mother, that's enough. You have caused sufficient harm. This concludes today. The conversation went on for another hour, finalizing the specifics and wording of the settlement. Throughout the entire process, I watched Victoria's gradual collapse as she came to terms with how completely her plans had failed. The woman who had tried to bully me into giving in was now yielding to conditions set by the very individual she had aimed to victimize. 3 days later, we met again at the law firm that handled the HOA's legal matters. The executives from Clearwater Development made their offer, which was almost 3 times what I had originally paid for the property. It was more than sufficient to buy an even bigger plot of land further along the coast, one with a superior view and none of the negative history of the current one. After much thought and extensive talks with Olivia, I took their offer. Victoria put her signature on the settlement agreement, her hand surprisingly firm despite the shame of her circumstances. The agreement contained not only my conditions, but also clauses designed to reform the Oakage HOA to stop similar power abuses from happening again, a legacy quite different from the one Victoria had imagined. As the meeting wrapped up, Jennifer approached me discreetly. I've left the board, she shared. I'm launching my own real estate firm, one that prioritizes ethical practices. I wanted to express my gratitude. This whole ordeal has been an eye-opener for many of us. Sometimes a significant jolt is needed to see what we've been condoning, I responded, sincerely hoping for her success in her new endeavor. Thomas was the final person to speak with me before I departed. I realize this isn't how you envisioned things, he remarked. but I trust the final result is satisfactory nonetheless. It's different, I conceded. But at times, being adaptable is more crucial than sticking to a rigid plan. I learned that from designing security systems. The most effective defense isn't always about constructing impenetrable barriers, but about developing versatile responses to threats. Outside the office building, I paused to gaze back at the Oakage community in the distance. Its grand gate shone in the afternoon light. It was no longer a symbol of exclusivity that I found daunting, but simply a decorative entrance to a neighborhood much like any other. At times, the greatest triumph isn't in vanquishing your opponent, but in completely changing the nature of the conflict. Victoria had laid a trap for me, never suspecting that she was stepping into one herself. And within that unforeseen turn of events lay a lesson of far greater value than any plot of land, regardless of how magnificent the view.